The courtroom was unusually quiet that morning, even though it was completely full. People sat on long wooden benches, stretching their necks to see what was happening at the front of the room. Some held their breath, some whispered to each other, and some stared at the door as if waiting for something unexpected to happen. Everyone knew today's hearing would be tense, but no one understood just how strange things were about to become. Then the man at the center of the whole case walked in. He wasn't someone who looked dangerous or loud or arrogant. If anything, he looked tired. Not the tiredness a person gets from one bad night of sleep, but the kind that builds up after weeks and weeks of stress. His clothes were neat, not fancy, just simple and clean. He carried himself calmly, even though everyone's eyes were on him. He took a slow breath as he stepped inside and moved toward the seat where he was supposed to stand. People watched him carefully. Some lifted their eyebrows. Others seemed confused, like they didn't understand how someone like him had become caught in such a messy situation. A few had already made up their minds about him before knowing anything at all. That was how things usually worked in that courtroom, opinions first. Facts later. He stood quietly, his hands folded in front of him. He didn't try to speak to anyone. He didn't look around for support. He just waited. The sound of a door opening broke the silence. Everyone stood as the judge entered the courtroom. She walked with confidence, her robe flowing behind her. In her hand, she carried a thick file filled with documents, notes, and printed papers. The file looked heavy, and her grip on it was tight. Maybe too tight. She sat down and adjusted her glasses, scanning the room with a sharp, almost impatient look. Her eyes paused on the man standing quietly. She didn't smile, didn't nod. She simply stared at him for a moment, long enough to make other people feel uncomfortable. Then she turned her attention to the lawyers. One of the lawyers, the one representing the man, straightened his papers nervously. The other lawyer smirked confidently, as if expecting the day to go perfectly his way. The judge finally spoke, her voice firm and cold. She didn't waste time with greetings or any gentle words. She opened the thick file on her desk and began flipping through pages loudly, almost theatrically. Each page turned with a sharp sound, reminding everyone that she held all the power in that room. The man continued, standing calmly. He didn't move, didn't frown, didn't make any sound that could be interpreted as disrespectful. If anything, he looked like someone who had prepared himself for the worst, but still hoped for the best. The judge sighed heavily, loud enough for half the courtroom to hear. It was the kind of sigh that said she was already annoyed, even though nothing had happened yet. She tapped a pen on her desk, looked at the man again, and then looked back at the file, as if already disappointed. People sitting in the benches leaned toward each other. "What's wrong with her today?" One person whispered, "She looks angry already." Another replied quietly, "Maybe she didn't want this case." One else murmured. Whispers floated around the room like tiny echoes. But the judge didn't seem to care. She continued flipping pages, shaking her head slightly each time she reached a new section. As though everything she read annoyed her more than the last, the man didn't react. His calmness surprised some people. In such a stressful moment, anyone else might have shifted nervously or looked down or showed fear. But he just stood there, his quietness almost too steady. The judge suddenly stopped, flipping the pages. She lifted her head and looked directly at him. Her gaze was sharp, filled with a frustration no one could understand. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "So," she said slowly, "you are the one who believes this entire process has been unfair." Her tone wasn't curious. It was challenging, but the man didn't speak out of turn. He simply nodded politely. The way someone does when they're trying to remain respectful, even when the atmosphere is heavy. The judge frowned. She didn't seem pleased with his calm response. Instead of asking the lawyers to continue, she turned directly to him again. "Your behavior today," she said, "is already showing signs of disrespect." The courtroom froze. People looked at each other. They didn't understand what she meant. The man had done nothing, literally nothing, except stand quietly. He blinked, confused, but didn't argue. The judge flipped another page dramatically and shook her head again, this time even more exaggerated, as if she wanted everyone to know she wasn't happy with the case or the person involved. The man's lawyer shifted nervously, adjusting his glasses, clearing his throat, and trying to find the right moment to speak. But the judge didn't give him a chance. Each time he leaned forward slightly, she held up her hand, stopping him before he even opened his mouth. Finally, she let him speak. "Your Honor," the lawyer said softly, "my client has been respectful throughout this entire process. He has complied with every instruction." The judge cut him off sharply. "I am not speaking to you right now," she snapped. "I am addressing him." The lawyer stepped back, stunned and embarrassed. People in the courtroom whispered again, this time more cautiously. It wasn't normal for a judge to act this way. It felt personal, like something deeper was pushing her reactions. The man remained still. He didn't respond, didn't defend himself. His quietness wasn't arrogance. It was more like he had already seen moments like this before, had learned that staying calm was the safest choice. But to the judge, his calm expression only seemed to irritate her further. She leaned forward, lowering her voice, but keeping it firm. "You are standing there," she said, "acting as if you have nothing to answer for. Your silence is making this process more difficult. You are not cooperating." The man's eyebrows lifted slightly. He looked genuinely confused. He had followed every instruction. He had listened, waited, and stayed respectful. But now, somehow, his silence was being used against him. The people in the courtroom felt the air tighten. Some shifted uncomfortably on the benches. Some watched the judge carefully, trying to understand what was wrong. Others stared at the man, waiting to see if he would finally speak up or raise his voice or show frustration. But he didn't. He simply spoke softly. "For the first time since entering the courtroom, Your Honor, I am here to cooperate in every way. I am only waiting for your guidance." His voice was calm, gentle, polite. It should have softened the atmosphere, but instead, the judge stiffened, as if his politeness itself was something she couldn't stand. She slammed the file shut. The sound echoed sharply through the courtroom, making several people jump. Her face tightened. She tapped her fingers on the desk and then said the words that would change the entire mood of the room. "If you continue this behavior," she said coldly, "I will have no choice but to take action." In fact, she paused for a moment, her eyes narrowing. "I may consider placing you in custody right now." People gasped. The lawyer froze. The man blinked slowly, processing what she had just said. Custody. For what? He hadn't argued. He hadn't disrespected anyone. He hadn't broken any rule, but the judge didn't seem interested in fairness at that moment. Her frustration had reached a strange, unexplained point, and no one understood why. The lawyer tried to speak again, but she raised her hand sharply. Silencing him, the man looked straight ahead, breathing deeply, trying to stay composed even though the threat was unfair. And suddenly, everyone in the courtroom felt the tension rise like heat in the air. Something about the judge's attitude didn't feel just strict. It felt personal, emotional, like she was dealing with something more than just a case. People leaned forward again, whispering, "What is she doing? Why is she acting like this? This doesn't feel right." The judge didn't care about the whispers. She picked up her pen again and stared at the man with a look that said she was moments away from making a drastic choice. One that could change everything and no one, not even the man standing calmly in front of her, had any idea that this was only the beginning of a courtroom moment that would shock everyone who witnessed it. The judge's last words hung in the air like a heavy cloud, and for a long moment, no one in the room moved. Even the sound of people breathing seemed to stop. The man stood still, holding on to his calmness like a person hanging on to the last branch in a storm. He didn't know why the judge was reacting so sharply, but he could tell something had shifted inside the courtroom. Something that made everyone uncomfortable. The judge leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against the wooden desk. Her expression didn't show anger anymore, it showed something else. Something like irritation mixed with impatience. She looked at the man as if she expected him to suddenly break down, argue, or plead. But he didn't give her any reaction to feed on. His lawyer cleared his throat quietly and tried again to speak. This time, he did it gently, almost like someone approaching an animal that might bite if startled. "Your Honor," he said softly, "my client is here to cooperate. If there is something specific he needs to do, please let us know, and we will follow your instruction." The judge didn't appreciate his polite tone. Instead, she narrowed her eyes at him, as if he had offended her simply by showing calmness. She pressed her lips together and glanced back at the thick file she had slammed shut moments ago. Without opening it, she tapped it again, almost as if she wanted to remind everyone that she held the power. "Do not interrupt me again," she said sharply. "I am aware of the situation. I do not need your commentary." Her voice echoed across the wood-paneled room. People sitting on the benches exchanged glances. Some shook their heads, but quietly afraid to make any noise. Others stared at the judge in disbelief. They had seen her strict before, but this was different. She seemed ready to explode at the smallest thing at that moment. The man's lawyer stepped back, his face turning slightly pale. He looked at his client as if silently asking him to remain calm. The man nodded gently. He wasn't planning to fight. He only wanted to get through this process without making things worse. The judge looked at him again, her expression unreadable. Then, without warning, she leaned forward. "Your silence," she said, her voice cold and slow, "is disrespectful to this court. You are standing there as if you do not care about the seriousness of these proceedings." The man blinked, confused once again. How was silence disrespectful? He had only been quiet because she wasn't letting anyone talk. But he didn't argue. He didn't roll his eyes or shift impatiently. He simply spoke softly, with the same respectful tone he had used earlier. "I do care, Your Honor. I am only waiting for your direction." His words floated gently through the courtroom like a calm breeze. But the judge reacted as if they were a challenge. She sat up straight, her jaw tightening. "So you are suggesting that I am not giving proper direction?" The man hesitated. He knew no matter what he said, she might twist it into something negative. So he chose neutrality, hoping it would calm the atmosphere. "No, Your Honor. I simply mean that I am listening." But nothing seemed to soften her mood. The judge stood up suddenly, her robe shifting around her as she moved. She picked up the thick case file and slapped it down again, this time even louder. A few people in the audience jumped in surprise. The bailiffs, standing at the sides of the room, exchanged worried glances. Even they understood that something wasn't normal. She raised her chin and looked down at the man as if she were a mountain looking down at a small rock. "You are testing my patience," she said, her voice low and sharp. "If you do not show proper respect, I will hold you in contempt." Again, the room froze. Contempt. For being calm? People turned to each other with expressions that said they couldn't believe what they were hearing. Even those who didn't know the man personally could tell that he wasn't doing anything wrong. His posture, his tone, his patience, everything about him showed respect. The only person who didn't see it was the judge. He took a slow breath and kept his eyes lowered. The lawyer beside him whispered quietly, "Stay calm. Don't say anything unless necessary." The judge watched him closely, as if waiting for him to make even the smallest mistake. Then she pointed her pen at him. "Step forward," she commanded. The man walked toward the front of the room, his steps steady but gentle. He stopped where she motioned and waited. She studied him for a moment, her face unreadable. Then she said, "Do you understand the seriousness of your situation?" "Yes, Your Honor," he replied softly. "And yet you think this is the appropriate behavior for someone in your position." He looked at her, genuinely confused. "I am trying my best to be respectful, Your Honor." His honesty didn't help. She snapped back immediately. "Trying is not enough." The words hit the air like a sudden clap of thunder. Some people whispered again. What does she want from him? He's literally doing nothing wrong. She's taking this too far. The judge's face grew even more tense. She picked up the file and opened it again, flipping pages fast, not reading them, just flipping them. Then she pointed at a page with her pen and said, "This entire case has been dragged longer than necessary. And your attitude is the reason." The man felt a sting of frustration inside, but he didn't show it. He knew reacting would only make things worse. so he stayed silent. Too silent. Apparently, the judge slammed the file shut for the third time. "That's it," she said in a firm, almost triumphant tone. "Your lack of cooperation is now interfering with court proceedings. I will be forced to take action."
Oh.
The lawyer quickly stepped forward. "Your Honor, respectfully, my client has complied with every requirement enough." The judge raised her voice for the first time, making everyone flinch. "If he cannot show proper respect, the court will take measures." The bailiff straightened, sensing something big was about to happen. The man looked at the floor, not out of shame, but because he felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He could feel hundreds of eyes watching him, wondering how he would respond. Finally, the judge pointed directly at him. "I am considering placing you under custody today." A wave of shock ran through the courtroom. People weren't even whispering anymore, they were frozen, stunned. The man lifted his head slowly and looked at her, not with anger, but with disbelief. His mind raced. Custody for what? What had he done wrong? He had tried to stay respectful. He had followed every instruction. He had spoken softly. He had never raised his voice. Still, the judge behaved as if he had caused chaos. His lawyer spoke again, more urgently this time. "Your Honor, there has been no disrespect. My client is only responding when spoken to. There is no legal basis for, I said, enough." The judge's voice cut the air like a sharp blade. Even the bailiffs looked confused now. They had seen difficult people in court before, loud people, angry people, people who argued endlessly. But this man wasn't any of those. He was the opposite, and yet he was the one being threatened. The judge reached for a button on her desk, the one used to call additional officers into the courtroom. Her hand hovered over it. People in the gallery leaned forward, sensing that something dramatic was about to happen. The man's chest tightened. He didn't want to be arrested for no reason. He wasn't trying to challenge the judge. He just didn't know what else he could do. Every word he spoke was taken the wrong way. Every silence was treated like defiance. He felt trapped as if the courtroom. Walls were closing in around him. The judge pressed her hand flat against the desk and said, "If this continues, I will order your immediate detention." The room felt hotter. The air felt heavier. Even the ceiling lights seemed brighter, harsher. People shifted nervously, waiting for the moment she would snap completely. No one knew it yet, but the judge's actions were about to lead to something she never expected, something that would change the entire direction of the case. And this tension, this unfair pressure, this strange behavior, it was only the beginning of the backfire waiting just around the corner. The air inside the courtroom felt heavier than before, almost as if every breath people took carried the weight of tension building up slowly. The judge's last warning still echoed in the minds of everyone there. Even though she hadn't yet ordered anything final, her tone made it clear she was on the edge of doing something drastic. Nobody could relax. Not the man, not the lawyers, not even the bailiffs standing on each side of the room. The man tried to stay calm, but his heart beat harder than before. For a moment, he stared at the floor, not because he was ashamed, but because he was trying to gather some strength. He wasn't sure how he ended up being treated like this, but he knew he had to control his emotions. Any small reaction from him could be twisted into something worse. The judge's eyes had been following him like a hawk since the moment he entered the courtroom, and nothing he did seemed to satisfy her. His lawyer stood beside him, whispering quietly, "Just stay calm. Don't react. We'll handle it." His voice, although gentle, carried a hint of fear. Even he felt helpless. How could he protect his client if the judge refused to listen? People in the courtroom sat stiffly, watching everything with a mixture of confusion and concern. They could sense the unfairness, but they were powerless to interfere. A few people exchanged glances that said, "This isn't right." But no one dared speak aloud. The judge flipped open the case file again, her movements sharp and loud. She wasn't even reading anything. She was simply flipping through pages in frustration, as if the sound alone would prove her authority. Every time a page turned, it snapped the silence like a whip. Then she closed the file again with a hard bang. "That's enough," she said, her tone cold but strangely shaky. "I will not allow this courtroom to be disrespected any longer." The man raised his head, looking at her with genuine confusion. How was he disrespecting anything? He had been polite every second, but he didn't speak. He didn't want to give her another excuse. The judge stood up suddenly. Her robe shifted heavily around her. Even the bailiffs straightened as if preparing themselves for whatever she was about to command. She stared at the man for a long moment, too long. People held their breath without even realizing it. Then she spoke. "Bailiffs," she said, her voice loud and steady. "Prepare to take him into custody." Gasps filled the room. A few people covered their mouths. Some looked at the man with sympathy. Others looked at the judge in disbelief. The air trembled with shock. The bailiffs hesitated for a breath. Not because they didn't know their job, but because they didn't understand why they were being asked to do this. The judge hadn't given any legal reason. She hadn't mentioned any rule he broke. She just gave the order as if her frustration was enough. The man's lawyer stepped forward urgently. "Your Honor," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "there is no basis for this. My client has shown complete respect. There has been no violation of any kind. With all due respect, you cannot order the judge cut him off sharply. I can, and I will." Her sudden confidence made the tension rise even higher. People leaned forward, waiting for the bailiffs to move. The man stood still, trying to process the reality of what was happening. The idea of being taken away, treated like someone who had done something wrong, twisted his stomach. He wasn't scared of jail. He was scared of the injustice. He feared it would stain everything about him. Even though he didn't deserve it, the bailiffs took one small step forward, just one, before they could take another. The man's lawyer hurriedly reached into his file folder and pulled out a sealed document. His hands shook slightly, but he held it up. "Your Honor," he said loudly, "before you proceed, you need to see this." The judge frowned, annoyed by yet another interruption. "What now?" She snapped. "This," the lawyer said, voice stronger now, "is a certified order from the higher court." The courtroom fell silent immediately. Higher court. Those words were powerful. They carried more weight than any frustration or emotion happening inside that room. The judge's eyes narrowed. She didn't reach for the document. She didn't even lean forward. Instead, she stood still, as if challenging the lawyer to continue. The clerk walked over and took the document from the lawyer's hand, then brought it to the judge's desk. The judge grabbed it with stiff fingers. She read the first line, then the second. Her expression changed, not dramatically, but enough for people who were watching closely to notice. Her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed again. Her jaw tightened. She blinked twice, as if trying to process something she didn't want to accept. Everyone leaned in. Holding their breath, the judge read the document again. Slower this time. The lawyer spoke softly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear. "The higher court has taken supervisory control over this case. You no longer have the authority to issue any custodial orders at this stage." The room erupted into whispers. People turned toward each other in shock. Some looked relieved, some excited, and some just stared at the judge to see how she would react. The bailiffs stopped moving. They looked at the judge, waiting for her next instruction. Even they understood that a higher court order overruled everything happening in this room. The judge placed the document on the desk, but her fingers tightened around its edges. She looked up slowly, her face pale. The confidence she had displayed moments earlier suddenly faded, replaced by something that looked like disbelief, maybe even embarrassment. She cleared her throat but couldn't find any words at first. Her lips parted, then closed again. It was the first time since the hearing began that she looked unsure. The lawyer continued. "Any attempt to place my client in custody would be a violation of that order." The judge glared at him, but the fire behind her eyes was gone. She knew the higher court's decision was final. She could argue, she could protest, but it wouldn't matter. The law was the law. She had just crossed a line she wasn't allowed to cross. She leaned back slowly in her chair, trying to compose herself. The entire courtroom watched her every tiny movement. The silence was so deep that even a pen falling on the ground would have sounded like an explosion. The man stood quietly, feeling a strange mix of relief and confusion. He didn't smile. He didn't look proud. He wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. He simply allowed the moment to settle. His heart slowly calmed, but the weight of the scene remained heavy on him. The judge took a deep breath. She tried to speak again, but the words didn't come out smoothly. When they finally did, they were quieter than before. "This hearing will be paused." People exchanged looks. Paused? That was the only thing she could say after everything that happened. The judge avoided eye contact with the man. Her tone was still firm, but without the confidence she had earlier. "No action will be taken today," she added, almost reluctantly. The lawyer nodded gently, accepting the statement. The bailiffs relaxed, stepping back to their original positions. The tension in the room dropped slightly, but not completely. The shock still hung in the air like a cloud refusing to leave. The man stepped back slowly, feeling the pressure lift off his shoulders. He couldn't fully relax yet. This wasn't over, but he could finally breathe again. People began whispering more freely now. She almost arrested him for nothing. Good thing his lawyer had that document. It could have gone really wrong. That judge nearly messed everything up. Everyone had an opinion, and none of them supported the judge's earlier decision. The judge pretended not to hear them, though her stiff posture suggested she heard every whisper. She shuffled some papers around her desk, trying to regain control of the room, but it was pointless. The courtroom had already seen too much. Her authority, at least for today, had slipped through her fingers. She finally stood up to leave the room, her movements slower than before. When she walked out the door, she didn't look back. As soon as she disappeared, the courtroom released the breath it had been holding. The man remained standing for a moment, trying to understand everything that had just happened. The lawyer placed a hand lightly on his arm and said quietly, "You handled that well." "Very well," the man nodded, though he still felt shaken inside. He had come so close to being taken away for absolutely no reason. The memory of that moment would stay with him for a long time. But for now, he was safe, and the judge's attempt had just backfired harder than anyone expected.